dead end street.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter how you slice it, it all ends up here. It's funny, really. People spend all their lives collecting and buying things, working hard just to purchase things that won't last. You know, when it first bought it, it may have all the bells and whistles, might be the brightest and shiniest thing on the floor, nicest on the shop, but in the end, everything falls apart. It's confusing when you think about it. Kind of odd that people spend so much time and effort trying to take care of things, buy things, tend to things. In the end, there's nothing left but garbage. Yeah. Strange when you think about it, but I guess, well, there you have it. No matter how you look at it, all that stuff that people spend all their lives spending money on, taking care of, eventually it all comes back to me. In the skit that you just saw with that devastatingly handsome young man, you were presented with the idea that everything seems to break down or fall apart or rot. That sort of fits the first part of the book of Ecclesiastes, and in some sense maybe even the theme of the whole book. It's the exploration of the meaning of life and the realization that from a certain angle of view, everything just seems to not amount to much. If we begin by looking at the first few verses of the book of Ecclesiastes, just verses 1 and 2, it says, "The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." At the very beginning of this book, the writer Solomon wants us to know that from a certain angle of view, which he's going to explain to us in a few moments, life seems to be lacking in purpose and significance. It seems that life itself is meaningless. The word itself communicates the idea of something that is a pointless endeavor. And there's a sort of emptiness extended to it. And for some reason, Solomon is able to say this sense of meaninglessness relates to everything. Absolutely everything, he says, is pointless, frivolous, vain, insignificant. It's meaningless. Even more so, he says, that this is such a pervasive reality that he is able to describe the meaninglessness of meaninglessness. In the old translations, we used to say vanity of vanities. In modern translations, we say utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless in this world. Now, that may sound kind of strange, and it may even sound kind of shocking coming from the Bible. Considering that you would expect someone who knows who God is and sees the world through God's eyes to see real value and significance and purpose in this world. But from a certain angle of view, looking at this world as Solomon's going to describe it, he wants us to realize that the pursuit for purpose without God, if you can't see beyond the world in which we live, truly leads us to a point of meaninglessness. In the next verses, he begins to describe the nature of the world in which we live. Verses 3 through 7. "What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams come from, there they return again." In order to impress upon us this idea that there is a pointlessness to life, or seemingly so, he wants to draw our attention to several things that illustrate what this life is like. It is life, as he says in the book of Ecclesiastes, under the sun. Life under the sun seems to represent in this book the idea of life if you take only a this world view. If you can only see life from the perspective of what we can know from observing what's happening around us in this life, in this world, or life under the sun, it appears that there's just redundancy and nothing of significance is ever really accomplished. For example, he says, what is the gain? What endures? What is the profit from all the labor that is expended by man under the sun in just this world? If you can't see beyond the horizons of the earth and the human situation, if there's no eternity, if there's nothing beyond what we can see and experience here on this earth, life under the sun, what's the profit? What's the gain? Especially considering that it involves for us as people what we might call hard labor. It's difficult to live in this place. And as we continue to look at the world around us, we come to a greater realization of the fact that the world seems to be sort of moving along, but what really gets accomplished? In order to create this picture of, well, life just sort of goes on in this place, he points us to several different images that we can get our hands on. The first is people. He wants us to realize that the generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Looking at the world, it seems that people live, people die, but life just goes on and on and on. Another picture that presents sort of the meaninglessness of this world is looking at the sun. It isn't as if he's trying to make an argument here as much as he's just trying to illustrate. He's saying, here's the way it works. The sun rises and the sun sets. It happens every day, over and over again. And though motion is taking place, although something is happening, it is a repetitive motion that doesn't amount to any significant change in the world. It simply goes on and on. The sun rises, and he says it literally pants or crawls back to where it started from so it can set again. And it's not a phenomenal or significant event because guess what? It'll happen again tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that and the day after that, and time just seems to keep going right along regardless of what we as people do or don't do. The second illustration he uses is of the wind. He says the wind blows, it creates motion, it actually has a presence, but in the end things are pretty much the same as they always were. And so the wind itself seems to illustrate just the ongoingness of life and the pointlessness of what happens in this life. Finally, he talks about water and the endless cycles of activity. It isn't that Solomon's trying to describe the evaporation process or the conservation of energy or mass or anything like that. He's simply saying, you know what? It's like this in life. It just keeps moving ever forward. And we as people come and go somewhere during the process, and the earth continues to flow and move on in its direction. And so what he's doing here is he's creating for us this picture, this impression of what is the nature of human life? He's answering that question and he's saying it is life from the perspective of just living in this world and just seeing us in relationship to this world seems to be pointless. It seems to be meaningless. But he goes on to describe it further in the 8th verse when he says, all things are wearisome more than anyone can say. The eye never has enough seeing, and the ear is never filled by hearing. In other words, life simply wears us out. Now, that's kind of a depressing picture. But I think one of the things you're going to see as you study the book of Ecclesiastes is that Solomon wants us to see a depressing picture. He wants to lead us down pathways and cause us to investigate where those paths really lead us and what conclusions we can draw. He wants to present a picture for us of life without God actively involved, and life without any knowledge of anything that will happen beyond this life, this place. It's that reoccurring theme of life under the sun. And he says the reality is, it is a tiresome existence. If this is all we have to look forward to, if this life, as far as we can observe, is all that there is, then this is a tiresome, it is a burdensome experience. And that's important to know. He wants us to know that we'll never be satisfied. You simply never get enough. The reality is that we never get enough of seeing, enough of hearing. We never experience satisfaction, and it is a wearisome process. Now that sounds kind of discouraging, but Solomon is presenting us with our first dead end. It's the idea of trying to pursue purpose and meaning in life while looking no further than our own human experience and having nothing more to hope for than what we will experience in this life. One way that he reinforces this idea is in verses 9 through 11, as he talks about sort of the redundancy of history, we might say. In verse 9 he says, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, 'Look, this is something new'? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. There's no remembrance of men of old. And those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who will follow." So why is it that in this world in which we live, it appears that there are things of purpose and meaning and significance? Well, part of the reason is because we only look at them superficially, and we don't consider that things just seem to continue on through a course. And to drive this idea home, Solomon focuses on the idea that nothing is really new. The fact is that the ideas that we have, we don't know that they're original to us. We may spend a lot of time copywriting our way of thinking or our perspective on things, but the fact of the matter is, ideas that seem new to us may in fact be very old ideas. Now it might seem strange to us to hear someone say, is there anything really new? I mean, we live in the age of technology. We have things that no other generation had or could even imagine. And so we say, well, of course there are new things. And there are new technologies, new methods, new tools, new techniques. But the fundamental questions of mankind haven't changed a bit. And the human condition is the same as it has always been. When Solomon breaks it down to the fundamental questions of why we live, what happens to us as we are living, what we have to look forward to, what we place our confidence in, and the ultimate reality of death, he can assuredly say, you know what? Nothing's new. Things are the same now as they have always been. And so when he looks for meaning in life, he finds that this life, restricted to this place and this perspective of just dwelling on this earth, leaves him longing for greater understanding, greater perspective. It leaves him weary. Sometimes, he says, we think something is new, but it's not. And the reason why we think it's new is because we don't know what happened before in time and history. Sometimes we think things are new, but they only seem that way because we've simply forgotten. It's interesting to note this sense of forgetting the greatness of the past that Solomon wants us to focus on. It's as if he says to us, this life in which we live is challenging. This life is in some sense mundane. It is in some sense wearisome. It is meaningless in the sense that though we expend all of our energy and time and effort to accomplish certain things, in the end, we're simply forgotten. Now, there may be people of greatness that live on through history books, and they may be of some significance to somebody who reads the book. But the reality is, for all of our work and our effort and our striving and struggles, who of us is actually remembered? It's interesting right now, we're watching the Olympics, and we are kind of affixed to all these people who are achieving these great things. And it's marvelous to watch them in their moment of glory. But I caught myself the other day sort of sitting back and thinking, okay, who won the gold medal in that event 4 years ago, or 8 years ago, or 12 years ago? It occurs to me how quickly great achievements are forgotten. In our first lesson, we're exploring the question of how we achieve purpose and meaning and significance in life. And our first dead-end lesson is for Solomon to remind us that if we can't see beyond ourselves, if we can't see beyond our world, if all we can imagine is life under the sun, life without eternity, life without purpose or significance being brought to our lives and added to our lives by God, then we ultimately end up following a trail that will lead us to a place that he can say is absolutely insignificant, unworthy of living, and meaningless.